Let's get started, Alex, with the way that Donald Trump has started his administration on January 20th and with the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, between Israel and Palestinians. It seems right now he's losing whatever he wanted to build, a ceasefire or maybe a temporary sort of peace and agreement between the two parties. But when you see the way that they're behaving right now, they're getting to the new in a new conflict with Yemen that they have been fighting Yemenis for 7, 10 years, and again the same sort of policy. How do you find the way that the things are changing?
I have to say I'm at a loss to explain it, Nima, because the situation, at least the way I understand it, is relatively simple in the day-to-day terms. Uh, what I mean by that, of course, they're not simple at all, but what I mean by that is that the Houthis announced, they haven't taken any action, that they would be that they would close off the Red Sea to Israeli commercial vessels, and almost immediately Donald Trump um, ordered the launch of attacks on Yemen. What the Houthis were asking for was that the embargo, the blockade on Gaza be lifted, that humanitarian aid, food, water, electricity flow be restored to Gaza so that the people there don't starve. That's simple enough. That's easy enough to understand. So as I see it, Donald Trump had a choice of leaning on Netanyahu and saying, restore humanitarian aid to Gaza. And that would have been the end of that. But instead, Gaza is still under a blockade. People are still starving. Netanyahu even launched new bombardments of Gaza. And the United States started bombing Yemen. So it seems beyond immoral, it seems completely incoherent, because it's the policy appears to defend a regime in Israel which is at the verge of collapsing, while at the same time they're taking extremely reckless risks to escalate the war in the Middle East completely beyond control. Because it seems that they're bombing Yemen, but the real target is Iran. The fallout from escalating to a full-scale war against Iran is incalculable. It's not just that the United States would almost certainly be defeated in such a war. That is, they could not prevail. It could precipitate the destruction of Israel. It could lead to an oil blockade. It could lead to a disruption of oil flow through from the Persian Gulf. There would be a good likelihood that the Houthis would target the Saudi oil production facilities. Oil price could shoot up beyond $100 a barrel to maybe $200, $300 a barrel. It would be a nuclear bomb underneath the global economy. So the risks that the administration is taking versus simply telling Netanyahu, make sure that the aid, the food, the water, the medicines, electricity continues to flow to these poor people of Gaza, they have opted for an escalation that could spin out of control very easily. So I don't know how to explain this. I've heard many analysts who are, let's say, still trying to find an understanding about this administration who are saying, well, you know, Trump has many battles to fight. That's true enough. And he has political considerations at home. So they have to choose their battles very carefully, and they're focusing on uh, making sure that the war in Ukraine doesn't escalate, that the Ukraine war gets ended, that we can have an armistice, that the situation in Eastern Europe is stabilized, that this doesn't erupt into World War III, and that at home, you know, they have a very powerful political bloc in you know, among Zionist Jews and evangelical Christians who are demanding this action, the you know, the unconditional support for Israel and for Netanyahu, no matter what, and that Trump administration cannot take all of these enemies all at once. All right, so we could say plausibly that may be true. But you know, Nima, you're a father and I'm a father. And when you see pictures of little children blown to bits, I don't care if you're Muslim or Christian or Jew or whatever, this is unacceptable. This is just a heartbreak. And I thought this was behind us with the departure of Biden administration, but apparently it's not behind us. Should we blame Trump? Maybe, but maybe some of these analysts are right. We should be blaming the still very powerful vestiges of this neo-imperial faction that is fanatically devoted to Israel. And Israel, we have to accept, is an imperial project. It's not a, you know, I grew up thinking that Israel was a homeland for the long-suffering Jews, where they can be safe. Now we see that it's not a homeland for the long-suffering Jews. They're not safe there. They're being cynically used as a destabilizing factor so that the Western financial interests can control the resources of the Middle East. And the way they do it is constantly keep the region destabilized, constantly at war. It's costing hundreds of thousands, if not millions of lives. And so long as that continues, we will not see peace in that region. So continued support for Israel in the United States and in Western Europe is one of those moments of history that we need to be able to overcome. Until that happens, until Israel is forced to make peace with its neighbor and become a normal country, whether there be a two-state solution or a one-state solution, the region will not know peace. And if peace cannot be established, then at any point in time, there's a risk that conflicts escalate beyond control. And Israel is a nuclear power. This is not a small thing. So I'm not sure what to think. You know, I've gone from being very enthusiastic about what Trump administration was doing to going cold and agnostic. I want to see evidence, and until we see evidence that they are not losing their way, I remain very, very cautious and only perhaps moderately optimistic, because I see that the situation is no longer what it used to be. That is, you know, Iran is not isolated anymore. Iran has full support from Russia and from China. This has to be taken into consideration. So there is probably a very strong limits to the actions that the United States can take against Iran.
It's evident from the way that Donald Trump is talking about it, specifically on his main social network. He's talking about, let's separate Yemen from Iran. let's force Iranian not to support Yemen, then we can isolate Yemen, we can defeat Yemen, then go after Iran. But we know that during the conflict in Ukraine, the Biden administration tried to do the same with Iran because they thought that Iran is important in terms of the conflict in Ukraine and the drones they're providing to Russia. They did the same with Iran. They put a lot of pressure on Iran during the war in Ukraine, the Biden administration, but they couldn't achieve that. Russia is a superpower. But when it comes to Yemenis, Iran knows how crucial is the support to Yemen. And we know that Yemenis, Iranian were able to help Yemenis to build their indigenous capabilities in Yemen. That they don't need Iran to provide them with everything, and they are producing them in Yemen. It doesn't seem it seems that these facts are totally ignored by the Trump administration.
Yes, and the recent history is also being ignored by the Trump administration because, in 2001, they went into Afghanistan. And then in 2021, 20 years later, they were thrown out of Afghanistan solely due to the indigenous resistance from the Taliban. So, if they were not able to overcome the Taliban in Afghanistan, which is not even remotely as powerful as the Ansar Allah is in Yemen, then how on earth are you going to defeat Yemen even if you isolated them? Remember how it went in Afghanistan. And so you're going to suffer the same fate in Yemen, only probably worse, because one thing that the Taliban were not able to do, and which the Yemenis can do, is sink the American aircraft carriers. And in fact, they don't even have to sink them. It's enough to damage them. It's enough to damage their runways, their control towers, and then these become a very useless sitting ducks in the middle of the ocean. And the whole strategy seems so strangely incoherent to me that one of the reasons why I was why I used to be much more positive about the Trump administration initially is because I took them to be competent people. It seemed to me that they studied, they did their homework, and that they were acting strategically. But now I'm doubting that because what they're doing doesn't seem to make any sense at all. So okay, you can explain it as driven by very powerful political influences in the United States, but still, your strategic choice is not to focus on the geography. So you say, okay, Russia, Ukraine, that one we have to let go of that. We lost there. So let's focus on the Middle East and, with an eye on China. Your strategic choice is whether you're going to continue to be an empire or not. That's your strategic choice. And if you've chosen not to continue being an empire, that is, not to continue being the military, political, financial, and diplomatic enforcement arm of the empire, then you have to roll all of that back rather than saying, okay, we're going to let go of Ukraine, but we're going to focus our resources on the Middle East, and we're going to support Israel still as our unsinkable aircraft carrier there because that's what we need in the region. Then you're still being an empire, and you're still wasting your resources on your imperial ambitions, which again is putting your own domestic economy and your military resources and the lives of your servicemen at risk and in danger. And then you're also risking an uncontrolled escalation that is, of course, going to go disastrously wrong. So at this time, it all seems so dangerously incoherent that I'm not even sure what the next week is going to bring. I do hope that these strikes on Yemen are going to die down. It does seem that they have started to move their aircraft carriers a bit farther from from the reach of Yemeni missiles and drones. But they're still insisting that this is, that this is Iran's doing, that Iran has to distance itself. So again, they're, rather than following up on Trump's letter to the Iranians, engaging in constructive dialogue, they're again going with their "you do as we say, or else we're going to hurt you." It's still the same continuation of an arrogant, hubristic policy that doesn't go down well with anybody, and it's only provoking resistance and revolt in all of the global south and elsewhere.
Alex, do you think that Donald Trump is able to start a new conflict in the Middle East? Because we know that his mindset is not this way. Here is what he tweeted in 2019. Here is what he says: going into the Middle East is the worst decision ever made. And how can we possibly imagine that when he's the president of the United States right now, he's gonna make the same wrong position, the same wrong decisions that the previous administration have made? If they start a new war with Iran, as you've mentioned, that would be disastrous. But how do you see the possibilities? Is the internal policy, is the internal frictions between the Trump administration and the political parties in the United States, together with the Israeli lobby, capable of making a new war in the Middle East?
Oh yeah, I think they're absolutely capable of making a new war. Escalating to war is not difficult. It's controlling what happens afterwards that is difficult, and extricating yourself that is difficult. Because if the Houthis sink an American ship, it's going to be extremely difficult for Trump to say, "Oh, that was a mistake, I guess. So we're going to back off, and we're going to try to solve this through talks and diplomacy." At that point, when you have dead sailors in the bottom of the ocean, hundreds or thousands of them, then you can no longer reverse course. So the statement from Donald Trump, which you just showed, is exactly why I find it extremely difficult to explain the administration conduct right now, because it tells me that they understand what needs to be done. They understand the right course of action, yet they're engaging in the wrong course of action, very obviously. I think that the only way I know how to explain it is domestic political pressures. And we can acknowledge it's true that Donald Trump has taken on many, many enemies at home, and they're attacking from all sides. And so maybe in some way that is not transparent, that is not communicated to us, they decided to appease a part of this political spectrum, because they want to, with RFK's Make America Healthy Again, they've pretty much taken on big agriculture, big pharma, the whole entire health industry, which is practically 1/5 of the United States GDP. With his friendly overtures to Russia and discussions about maybe having the military budget, he's pretty much made the military-industrial complex an enemy. He's taken on some of rolling out getting the United States disentangled from NATO. That's going to cause you a lot of enemies, and some of them are in your military. The CIA, the FBI, all of the deep state. So when you know the right course of action, yet you engage in the wrong course of action at huge risk of outcomes that you will not be able to control, then that tells me that maybe the developments are being pushed forward by these deep state actors and the political spectrum that is supportive of Israel. Where does that go, however, is, it could completely sink his presidency and completely destroy his legacy forever. So, the quick answer to your question is yes, of course they can open a new war. They can escalate a new war in the Middle East, but they will not be able to control the fallout, and they will almost certainly not be able to prevail in that war.
How do you see the situation of Netanyahu in Israel and the influence of that coming to the Trump administration? We know that the Israeli economy is not doing great, it's not doing well. Netanyahu, as the prime minister of Israel, is not in a good position. He has fired many of main officials in his government. The last one was the chief of Shin Bet that he was trying to dismiss. I don't know if he was successful. It seems that he has fired him. And how do you see the situation in Israel and the way that they're influencing the Israeli lobby in the United States and then coming to the Trump administration? Are they gonna save? Are they doing this to save Netanyahu and his space? We know that Ben Gvir, which separated from the Netanyahu administration, is joining again. What's going on? What's going on in Israel? What's the influence of Israel on Trump?
Well, it seems to me that the good metaphor for Netanyahu's government is that they're simply standing on very thin ice, and they're being held aloft by the support from American supporters of Israel. And it seems to me that all of this is a very, very unlikely thing to continue for a long time. Israel has made enemies of all their neighbors. They have ceasefires with 3 countries. They've broken 3 ceasefires with all 3. They haven't defeated Hamas. They haven't defeated Hezbollah. They have a hostile power at their doorstep in Syria. And I'm not talking about HTS. I'm talking about Turkey, really, by proxy. We don't know how that might end. Houthis are an enemy power with ability to strike at Israel. Iran has Israel through the crosshairs. They still never retaliated for Israel's last attack. Netanyahu's government now has a gathering opposition at home. He's fighting multiple legal battles against his government. So, all of this backroom maneuvering to provide not legitimacy, but at least political lifelines to Benjamin Netanyahu to continue at helm in Israel, I think has a very short life expectancy. And I think that when he falls, which he will, it's only a matter of time, then there's a risk that Israel itself descends into some form of a civil war. So the situation is a complete and total mess, and it's extremely unfortunate that in Israel there's now no viable opposition. There's no real opposition. Somebody who would actually take control and do a course correction to say, we've gone down the road, down the wrong path. We need to reverse course. We need to start speaking and negotiating with our neighbors. We need to make peace. They've kind of painted themselves into a corner where they only see their way forward with taking more control, creating buffer zones, displacing population, engaging in genocide. And I don't see how long this can go on until it implodes like a house of cards. The support from the Zionists in the United States is a mystery to me as well, because you're ultimately betting on a losing bet. You're doubling down on something that cannot continue. we'll learn with time, but I think that the situation is extremely unstable and extremely explosive. And at some point, I'm afraid that Benjamin Netanyahu might suffer the fate of somebody like Benito Mussolini or Nicolae Ceausescu, and maybe it's going to be the best deserved toppling ever.